What is the most unusual fact you know? Story 1. The first public game of basketball was played the same week and less than 100 miles away from the last American vampire hunt. On March 11th, 1892, James Naismith debuted his new game in front of a crowd of 200 spectators at the Armory Hill YMCA in Springfield, Massachusetts. Meanwhile, on March 17th, 1892, in Exeter, Rhode Island, a crowd of concerned villagers dug up the grave of 19-year-old Mercy Brown. She had died 2 months earlier, and locals had become convinced that her vampire was feeding on her sickly brother. In an effort to stop the undead Mercy, the crowd exhumed her corpse, burned her heart and liver, and gave the ashes to her brother in a tonic. Story 2. The state of Vermont did not vote for a single Democratic presidential candidate in the 132 years between the party's founding in 1828 and the election of 1960. Also, Walter Mondale is the only person from a major party to have lost a general election in all 50 states. He lost everything but Minnesota in the 1984 presidential race, then lost a Senate race in Minnesota in 2002. Has anyone won an election in all 50 states? Or even 48 in the 48 state area? FDR never won Maine or Vermont. Nixon never won Massachusetts. Reagan never won Minnesota, nor did G.H.W. Bush, if you count his elections as VP candidate. Also, no one has ever served on a presidential ticket for the full 16 years. Nixon came the closest. Story 3. There exists a hypothetical number called Graham's number. It is the name given to a number that, if written out in its entirety in any conceivable physical medium, would eclipse the length and width of the known universe. Describing Graham's number as hypothetical is inaccurate because it is a well-defined, finite number with a specific role in mathematics. The number serves as an upper bound in a problem within Ramsey theory, a branch of combinatorics. Despite its immense size, so large that its decimal representation cannot be fully written out, it is not an abstract or speculative concept. Graham's number is constructed using Knuth's up arrow notation, a method developed to represent extremely large numbers precisely. It is considered the largest number ever involved in a serious mathematical proof. Story 4. One of the most unusual facts I know is that if you shuffle a deck of cards properly, the sequence you've created has likely never existed before in the history of the universe. There are about 8 times 10, circumflex 67 possible ways to arrange a deck of 52 cards. That's an 8 followed by 67 zeros. To put it in perspective, that's more than the number of stars in the observable universe. So every time you mix up a deck for a game of solitaire, you're holding a sequence that's probably entirely unique in cosmic history. Makes you feel like a tiny card shuffling pioneer in an infinite universe. Story 5. That light poles are considered good with 15% deflection. So a 100-foot pole under full load, it can bend in a 90 miles per hour, wind up to 15 feet and still be considered okay. Of course, at that load, it ain't going to have lights on it anyway. Another little fun thought. You ever notice that your cell service can be great or crappy at your location, depending on the time of day? That's because heat from the sun causes the side it's shining on to expand some, while the opposite shaded side does not. Thus, the pole tends to bend a little depending on the time of day. Story 6. There's a word called sphygmomanometer. It's basically a blood pressure cuff. Homie, who first applied that to lie detecting, was trying to prove the innocence of a LeBron-looking kid during a murder trial as an expert witness. Judge did not admit the evidence from the sphygmomanometer. This led to the Fry standard of scientific evidence being accepted in a court of law. Then Homie got hired by DC Comics. Guess which superhero he invented? It involves a lasso of truth. Story 7. A fungi grows next to the highly radioactive elephant's foot in the Chernobyl reactor. It feeds off the gamma rays emitted by the nuclear fuel in a process known as radiosynthesis. If you were exposed to similar levels of radiation, you would have a lethal dose in 3 minutes. Radiotrophic fungus was first discovered at the Chernobyl site in 1991, just after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the start of internationally aided cleanup and containment efforts. Not so sure about right next to the elephant's foot, but it was definitely found growing in large, flourishing colonies all throughout the site's cooling water supply. This fungus appears to use melanin, the same dark brown pigment that gives humans all their various normal skin tones, except in much, much higher concentrations, to power sugar-producing reactions by deriving energy from nuclear decay, the same way plants and cyanobacteria use the green pigment chlorophyll to synthesize sugars by deriving energy from sunlight. Basically, this stuff is a mold colony that has the most extreme tan ever and uses it to eat radiation. Similar fungi have been found accumulated on the exterior hulls of low-orbit spacecraft, and experiments were recently, 2018 to 2019, conducted to begin investigating if the stuff could be used as shielding to protect astronauts from solar or cosmic radiation. Apparently, the results were promising. Story 8. Titanic was fitted with microphones for receiving underwater bell signals. With this system, the sound of submarine bells was received through the hull of the vessel. Submarine bells, used as fog signals, were located on lightships, at lighthouses, and even on some specially equipped buoys. They were actuated by electric signals, compressed air, or simply by wave motion. Titanic had two submarine microphones, one on each side. These were the ears of the ship. By switching between the port and starboard microphones and comparing the volume of the bells, the navigation officer could determine the direction to the navigation aid. Sound travels much further through water than through air. These bells could be heard over 15 miles away through the headset. A pretty cool way of navigating at a time when GPS and radar didn't yet exist. Story 9. All mammals over 3 kilograms, 6.5 pounds, pee for an average of 21 seconds, with a full bladder, independent of body size. From a 2014 paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, using high-speed videography and flow rate measurement obtained at Zoo Atlanta, we discover that all mammals above 3 kilograms in weight empty their bladders over nearly constant duration of 21 plus minus 13 seconds. This feat is possible because larger animals have longer urethras and thus higher gravitational force and higher flow speed. Smaller mammals are challenged during urination by high viscous and capillary forces that limit their urine to single drops. Our findings reveal that the urethra is a flow-enhancing device, enabling the urinary system to be scaled up by a factor of 3,600 in volume without compromising its function. This study may help to diagnose urinary problems in animals, as well as inspire the design of scalable hydrodynamic systems based on those in nature. Story 10. Sharks are older than trees. A lot older. 40 million years older. Trees as we familiarly know them today, a primary trunk, large height, crown of leaves or fronds, didn't appear on the planet until the late Devonian period, some 360 million years ago. You might be surprised to learn that sharks are older than trees, as they've been around for at least 400 million years. Weirder, I understand all coal formed during the time after trees appeared, but before the bacteria that breaks them down after they fell. No new coal has formed in a very long time. 100 million years? The best part about this is that the Appalachians, particularly the bits that pass through West Virginia, are only about 480 million years old, which the Cambrian explosion predates by 60 million years. So, John Denver got it wrong. Life is old there, yes, but it's older than the mountains. He got the trees a bit right. Story 11. Subway bread is legally considered cake in Ireland. This isn't false per se, but it comes from a misunderstanding of what happened. The Irish government did not legally classify Subway bread as cake. It just classified it with cakes and many other non-cake baked goods as a luxury item instead of a staple food source. In Ireland and others, there's a specific type of tax known as VAT, value added tax, that is applied to luxury items, but not essential items. In order to stop companies from defining everything they sell as essential to lower prices, VAT-excluded items must meet pretty strict regulations. One of the relevant regulations here is the division between bread, as a necessity, and confectionery and fancy, baked goods as a luxury. Subway bread has sugar equal in weight to about 10% of the flour used, meaning that it is classified as a luxury item with other fancy baked goods, such as cakes and certain other varieties of bread. Story 12. American shoe sizes are measured in barley inches, defined as the length of 3 ears of barley corn, whereas UK shoes are measured in industrial inches, defined as 25.39 millimeters. This is not true. Firstly, a barley corn, in reference to measuring length, was once the basis for the definition of a normal inch, but that's no longer the case. It used to be that an inch was 3 barley corn, but now an inch is defined by the metric system. So a barley corn is defined as 1/3 of an inch. We do not define inches based on actual barley corn. Secondly, the UK also uses this, just offset by one size. From Wikipedia, shoe size in the United Kingdom, Ireland, India, Pakistan, and South Africa is based on the length of the last used to make the shoes, measured in barley corns, 1/3 inch, starting from the smallest size deemed practical, which is called size 0. Finally, an industrial inch is more commonly known these days as an inch. 25.4 millimeters is just how long an inch is. The original industrial inch was far closer to 25.4 than 25.39. So to recap, the UK and US use mostly the same system. It's not based on actual barley corn. The barley corn unit is simply defined as 1/3 of an inch, and that inch is the same for both countries. Story 13, I have a few. Mantis shrimp can punch with the force of a .22 caliber bullet. Charlie Chaplin once placed third in a Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest. Finland is the medal capital of the world, having the most medal bands per capita. General Douglas MacArthur had an extremely elaborate plan to win the Korean War in no more than 10 days, consisting of about 50 tactical nukes, 2 U.S. Marine divisions, about 1,500 to 2,000 South Korean troops, and irradiating the entire northern border of North Korea with cobalt, which can last for 60 to 120 years. Story 14. Simple. Koala bears. Koala bears only eat one thing, eucalyptus leaves, which is poisonous for them at birth. Therefore, the newborns have to eat the feces from the mother to establish immunity for the poisonous leaves. Side note, this is also one of the reasons why the pouch opening is pointed towards the behind of the mother. Now, these eucalyptus leaves have almost no calories in them, meaning that the koalas have to sleep around 18 to 20 hours a day. The rest of the hours they pretty much need to eat all the time to get full. It's a wonder that these animals still exist. The only reason they haven't been wiped out by natural selection is that they are native Australian animals with almost no natural enemies. Story 15th. World War I was famously initiated by the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. The assassin responsible tried to bomb the carriage the Archduke and his wife were in, but mistimed it, so he ran away and blended in with the crowd. During the obvious commotion, Ferdinand's coach driver tried to take a shortcut through a back street, but found it blocked by people too, so had to perform a U-turn. By chance, the place he did it was outside of a cafe, where the assassin had decided to lay low and pretend that none of this was anything to do with him. So imagine his luck when his actual target started messing around, trying to turn his car around and go back down a random little street right in front of him. So he promptly loaded his gun and shot the man dead. World War I, and by extension World War II, was the result of a random coach driver getting caught in traffic. Story 16. Fidel Castro was utterly obsessed with milk. He was on record for one meal eating a total of 18 scoops of ice cream. He had a good portion of money set up for it. Copelia, which is the size of a city block and still one of the most well-functioning government structures in Cuba, was commissioned by Castro himself. There was also a notable incident in which he nearly ended a French dignitary over a disagreement regarding camembert superiority. His obsession ran so deep that Cuba had to import Holsteins from Canada to keep up with his demand. You see, Cuban cows, while hardy, do not produce large quantities of sweet milk. Holsteins, however, produce lots. But it was too hot, and many died of heat stroke, while those who lived did not have it in them to lactate with vigor. Using the people's funds, Castro's establishment set up a cooling facility for the Holsteins, where they could be corralled and milked in relative comfort. Still, they were stressed, too stressed to make a return on their enormous cost. Outraged, Castro set his sights even higher. He began genetic experimentation via crossbreeding to create a hybrid cow that could survive extreme heat while enduring the burden of massive milkers. His madness eventually bore fruit. A mutt named Ubre Blanca was the culmination of his efforts, resistant to heat and capable of producing 110 liters of freak cream in a day. It was a masterclass in mommeries. The Frankentitty survived for 13 years as a national symbol of Cuba. She was stuffed and placed behind glass, her DNA sampled for cloning, and a marble monument commissioned in her honor were what marked her death, along with a change in the national stamp and federal newspaper. Castro never soared this high again. At some point, he toyed with the notion of hydroponic grass patches in every Cuban household that would be complemented by dog-sized cows. It was ambitious, but alas, never saw fruition as Ubre Blanca did. Castro is known for a lot of things. He took over Cuba. He almost blew up Florida. He slept with several different women every day. He was a symbol of terror, oppression, fear-mongering, and revolution throughout the entire world. But he was also a man who really, really loved milk. Story 17. In the Middle Ages, doctors knew about diabetes. However, there was no effective way to test for blood sugar, so they had to test your urine instead. Diabetes was referred to as the honey disease because honey was the most common way to sweeten meals in Europe. And that sweetness would proceed to your urine and make it taste like honey if you had high blood sugar. So, yeah, if you were a nobleman in the Middle Ages, your doctor would be taste testing your urine to make sure it wasn't too sweet. Story 18. Just learned this one today. NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys both officially had 6 members. The guy who organized those groups insisted on being designated as a member of the bands. The members, despite making that dude millions of dollars, lived on a $25 per diem. They eventually had to take the guy to court to get their earned money. At one point, after having earned producer dude over $100 million in album sales, he took them all to dinner and gave them checks for their earnings, $10,000 each. Probably not weird compared to most facts here. But having grown up with those guys being as successful as they were, so much radio airtime, to think they were more poorer than you are, blew my mind. Story 19. A group of otters is called a raft. The rabbit noses that look like 2 hooks back to back are called a split lip because it's literally part of their lips. Their lip is split in half on top to let them have a better hold on leaves as they chew. Tamerlane, third powerful ruler of Mongolian Empire, had his mom help him lie his way into power, legitimacy issue due to no blood claim on role as chief, by saying he was a descendant of the Genghis Khan. His tomb was a tower in Russia, and he warned that if anyone disturbed his grave, something catastrophic would happen to them. So for hundreds of years, the tomb lay untouched, and a village sprang up near it. A few Soviet Union came by to investigate the tower, and was warned by the villagers to stay away or face the consequences. They laughed it off and went in. About a week later, Hitler invaded. Millions died. Coincidence? I don't know. Believe what you will. This story I learned in AP World was just one of the fun facts that popped up in my head. Story 20. There are 3 different species of elephants. The Asian elephant, endangered, the African forest elephant, endangered, and the African bush elephant, critically endangered. Asian elephants tend to be smaller, have a twin head dome, 2 bumps on top of their skull, and have small, rounded ears. African forest elephants are the smallest elephant. They have straight tusks and are darker than bush elephants. African bush elephants are the biggest and have curved tusks. Also, the African bush elephant has the least amount of toenails, while Asian and forest elephants both have 5 front toenails and 4 back toenails. The bush elephant only has 4 front toenails and 3 back toenails. Story 21. Time travel is just what you guys feel when you have a gap in your memory. It may feel like time is passing when you sleep, but actually, you have vivid dreams that your brain erases to free up space. Very rarely do you remember your dreams or gain self awareness during it. But when you are aware of yourself in a dream and you are aware you are dreaming, you might have fun for 8 hours in your imagination. Once you wake up, it's probably forgotten. Like nothing happened. Like you traveled in time. It's impossible to remember your entire dream. If you did, it might feel like you never went to sleep, like you went to a fantasy land. It's weird knowing that you might have horrible nightmares in your dream, but you will never remember it. Or maybe worse, we are dreaming right now, and when we go to sleep is the real reality? Probably not, but it's a very fun brain tease. Story 22. Pennsylvania Dutch isn't directly related to Dutch. It's derived from German. English speakers mistook Deutsch, German, for Dutch. There's a fast food chain in the US called Wiener Schnitzel. It does not actually sell Wiener Schnitzel. It sells hot dogs. The first movie to play in Saudi Arabian movie theaters in the 21st century was the Emoji Movie. While sometimes disputed, the origins of the croissant can be traced to Austria, not France. The largest air force in the world is the US Air Force. The second largest air force in the world is the US Navy. During the battle for Castle Itter, Americans fought with a Wehrmacht unit, the Austrian resistance, and an assortment of former prisoners held by the SS. These included a tennis player, a former French prime minister, two former French commanders in chief, and Charlie de Gaulle's older sister. They fought against an almost 200-man strong Waffen SS unit and won, even though they only had 38 people of their own. The strange alliance only had a single casualty. Story 23. One of the 2,600 people who died in the 9/11 attacks was a former FBI officer, John P. O'Neill. He was intensely studying the cause and who did the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, bomb detonated in parking garage. He knew of Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. He spent most of his career in the FBI doing that. After having some personal friction with the FBI, he left and took a job at the World Trade Center and was the head of security for it. When talking to one of his coworker knew about the unfortunate circumstance about leaving the FBI to be at this job. He then said jokingly, "At least they aren't going to bomb it again," in which O'Neill replied, "They are probably going to finish the job." 20 days later, the World Trade Center was attacked, and O'Neill died evacuating survivors from the South Tower. Story 24. Polarized lenses block light whose waves are oriented differently than the lens. So, if you line up two polarized lenses at 90 angles so that you can look through both, no light will get through. The first lens lets only light oriented in one direction, and the second lens blocks that direction because it's at 90 degrees relative to the first. So, what happens if you add a third lens at a 45-degree angle between them? Nothing, right? Because the first two are still blocking the same orientations. Nope, light gets through. I'm told this is due to quantum mechanics, which I know nothing about, but I've done the experiment and it absolutely works. Story 25. An average drunk driver driving a few miles home has a 1 in a zillion, hundreds of millions or more, chance of getting into an accident, causing death or serious injury. This is because such serious car accidents are extremely rare to begin with. And even if being over the limit increases the chance of getting into one by a factor of 100, it doesn't. You're still talking a 1 in millions chance. Source. They gave a client of mine a bogus charge, did some back of the envelope math, and had a PhD statistician and public health guy take a look at it. Please don't argue with me about it. It was 10 years ago, and I no longer have the supporting documents. Drunk driving has such a harmful effect on society, not because each instance of drunk driving is super dangerous, at least until you get to the high BACs, but because so many people are doing it all the time, like 5 or 10% of the people on the road, depending on when and where. If it was just a few Yahoo alcoholics, it would barely be a blip in the statistics.